had to rip up this program at the last minute because a CNN anchor talked himself out of a job. Rick Sanchez called Jon Stewart a bigot, that was bad enough, and then went off the deep end, suggesting that Jews control the networks and discriminate against Hispanics. That was reckless, but was it a firing offense? Anyone who makes his living in front of a microphone is going to say dumb things now and then, but Rick Sanchez delivered a reckless rant in a satellite radio interview that went on, and late Friday, CNN issued a terse statement saying he is no longer with the company. Sanchez brought a lot of passion to his job, first at MSNBC and then at CNN, whether he was reading messages from his many Twitter followers or, in one strange stunt, getting tased.
To show you how it works, I'm about to receive 50,000 volts of electricity. Do it. Oh. It hurts.
I was just asking Chad, how can you get a volcano in Iceland? Isn't it too when you think of a volcano, you think of like Hawaii and long words like that. You don't think of Iceland. You think it's too cold to have a volcano there. But no, there it is.
I'll be honest with you, I am a naturalized U.S. citizen. I was not born in the United States. I was born in Cuba, and then later on in my life, I became a naturalized U.S. citizen. And I've always been curious about how the naturalization process works. I just checked my Twitter board, just as I usually do to start the show. I got something like 1,800 tweets coming through.
Sanchez's mixture of animation and antics made him a natural target for comedians, especially Jon Stewart.
I'm looking over here at the other side of the room now. Switch that camera over there. Look at all the guys we have over here. Over there. I'm not sure who's directing. I'm positive.
You are. Well, Sanchez must have been stewing about such slights. In the radio interview Thursday with Sirius XM host and CNN contributor Pete Dominick, Rick punched back, talking about his Hispanic heritage and, unfortunately, went too far.
When they look at a guy like me, they see a guy automatically who belongs in the second tier and not the top tier. I think Jon Stewart's a bigot. That Rick Sanchez, the little Puerto Rican guy, I'll make fun of him. He's upset that someone of my ilk is at almost his level.
And then it got worse.
Stewart's a minority as much as you are.
Come on. How is he a minority? Yeah. Rick, very powerless people. I'm telling you that everybody who runs CNN is a lot like Stewart. And a lot of people who run all the other networks are a lot like Stewart. And to imply that somehow the people in this country who are Jewish, are an oppressed minority? Yeah.
In other words, Jews control the media and the banks, too. Joining us now to talk about Sanchez's firing and the questions it raises about ethnicity and journalistic boundaries. In Boston, Carol Simpson, the longtime former ABC News anchor and correspondent. And here in Washington, Jamie McIntyre, former CNN correspondent and founder of the blog lineofdeparture.com. And Paul Farhi, reporter for The Washington Post. Jamie McIntyre, those comments were offensive. We can agree on that. Was this an overreaction by CNN? Could Sanchez have been suspended or tased?
Well, I think the unfortunate part, actually, is that Sanchez was fired for these intemperate comments and not really for what he did on CNN, which is seen by many people in the industry as was kind of a joke. I mean, his delivery where he, ad-libbed the whole show and therefore had a lot of little slips that Jon Stewart made fun of.
What's wrong with being entertaining?
Combined with his antics. Well, it's okay to be entertaining, and I think people want that in television news, but what's missing there a lot of times is the context. And he made, in the course of doing that, he did a lot of sort of things that came off as very, very silly. His stunts about, where he's out in the middle of the ocean to be rescued or in a sinking car.
You didn't want him to be rescued, clearly.
That's why Jon Stewart made fun of him, not because of his ethnic heritage.
Okay, Carol Simpson, look, he's entitled to attack Jon Stewart, who has had a lot of fun slapping him around, but then he went off about Jews controlling the media, and that was obviously a bit too far.
He went too far. I think the problem is that all of this was building up. Was he not losing his show because the Elliot Spitzer Parker show is about to start? It was a day in which maybe everything, the perfect storm came together. And I think what happened was he just exploded with all of these things that had been in the back of his mind. And unfortunately, accusing Jews of being in control of everything and being prejudiced against him was unfortunate.
Sanchez didn't lose his primetime show. He was always a fill-in waiting for the Parker Spitzer show to start tomorrow. In fact, Paul Fire, my favorite part of this is that he was out promoting his book, Conventional Idiocy. But he was trying to make, before he got into the Jewish business, he was trying to make a point about what he called the elite Northeastern establishment liberals, who he thinks rule the world, but particularly the broadcast industry. Is that a fair point for him to make?
Well, no, actually. As an anchor, his stock in trade is his credibility. He can't be seen as the guy who's lashing out at Jews, at Northeastern liberals, or even his employer. Your credibility as an anchor depends on your neutrality and your credibility, and he blew it. That was the end of his credibility. No one can watch that guy again and say, this is an objective newsman.
What do you think of the fact, let me just interrupt here, about the fact that Sanchez is a valuable guy, hasn't had any comment on this, and that CNN, which found this serious enough to get rid of him, which is probably the right decision, didn't make any statement condemning the remarks?
Well, I mean, CNN is an employer, and in America, if you criticize your employer the way he did, you're going to lose your job. He went public. It's on satellite radio. Potentially now, millions of people have heard Rick Sanchez's criticism of his own company. Not kosher.
Well, you know, I should say, you know, I'm sure that Rick Sanchez, as a Cuban-American, had to, at some point, overcome some discrimination. But, you know, everybody in this business, at some point, you probably had the same experience. Somebody has said to you, you know, you don't really have what it takes. You should consider another line of work. It's a very common thing. And if you're a minority, I'm sure you might wonder whether prejudice might be a factor in that. But to
But you seem to be dismissing the fact that prejudice could be a factor.
Well,
This is a guy who came up, he was born in Cuba, he came up through Miami television, and maybe there were slights that he had to endure.
You know, anytime I think you're a minority, that's a legitimate question to wonder about, because you don't know what people's motivations are for saying these things, but it happens to everyone. But to say that he was made uncomfortable at CNN because of his Hispanic heritage, I think it's close to delusional. I mean, I'm not the best person to comment.
But it's odd to take on Jon Stewart. I mean, Rick Sanchez doesn't seem to realize that Jon Stewart is a comedian and does a satirical show, and that Rick Sanchez provided the raw material for Jon Stewart to make fun of.
More of a media critic than a comedian, I would say.
Go ahead, Carol.
What I'm trying to say is that Rick Sanchez, I can appreciate where he's coming from in terms of feeling that his ethnicity may have been a problem for other people. As a minority, I experienced that. And you have this sense that people are after you because of who you are. The fact that I'm not defending what he said at all, but I do understand his exploding with this charge that it's because I'm Cuban that people don't give me a chance. I talk about that in my own book, of feeling that way. So he had this subconscious feeling that people thought he wasn't as good as he was supposed to be, and saw the jokes that Jon Stewart made against him as, you know, something about who I am, when he's a comedian, as you have said. And also, I would be happy if Jon Stewart were replaying my takes, as silly as they may be. It's a lot of publicity. I can't understand his being that put off by it.
We'll see if we can arrange that. He does make fun of a lot of people. But interesting, Paul Fry, because this interview went on for some time. This was not just a line that slipped out or a joke on Sauer. And Sanchez seemed to me in the interview to be angry, to have a lot of resentment. Now, anger can work on television. Look at Bill O'Reilly, look at Keith Olbermann. I mean, they get ticked off and the viewers kind of root for them, their fans at least, but then there are boundaries.
Yes, and again, an odd target to pick on. This is a comedy show. Rick Sanchez is a public figure, whether he likes it or not.
And in fact, he needed a thicker skin.
He absolutely needs a thicker skin. If you're going to be on television and if you're going to watch The Daily Show, you're going to find that they will make fun of you. Now, for the record, Jon Stewart never made fun of Rick Sanchez's ethnicity.
Right.
Never called him out on anything as a result of who he is. He made fun of what he did on television.
Also, for the record, Jon Stewart's people would not comment to me, but in a Comedy Central taping yesterday, Stewart had a joke about this. If Jews run the media, he said, all Sanchez has to do is to apologize to us and we'll hire him back. But you make a more serious point, Jamie McTurk, which is you don't think he should have been on the air at CNN at all, particularly the direction that his show involved.
Well, my point is that the reason that Jon Stewart was able to mock him so effectively is that Rick did so many mockable things. And he did them over again. So
but does that make him a poor journalist?
Well, you know, it's a different style of journalist. It's a very much of a tabloid style of journalism that's more interested in inflaming public opinion than informing public opinion. I would be encouraged if CNN had decided it wanted to sort of go a little bit away from that and more back toward context. But for whatever reason, I think CNN's probably a little bit better off without Rick.
Do you think, Carol Simpson, that some minority journalists who experience the inevitable setbacks of trying to climb the ladder in a very tough and competitive business like television, and not only share Sanchez's resentment, but maybe look for scapegoats? Well, that guy got the job, that woman got the job, and I didn't. Why is that?
Exactly. I think too many minorities fall back on the issue of race and ethnicity to explain all of their setbacks, which I don't think is true. I agree with Jamie. I mean, I kind of thought of Rick as a blowhard, someone who was very full of himself, and I found him very amusing to watch on TV. But he thinks that he could have been better and bigger and all of these other things, and he wasn't because of his race as being a Cuban American. And then it tickles me because he looks as white as any white man. I mean, without his name, you probably would not know he was Cuban.
It's an odd sort of resentment, though. This is a guy who's got his own show on CNN.
2 hours a day on CNN. He filled in primetime twice now.
Hardly a failure. But, of course, you know, you take the scars that you've had coming up through the system, and undoubtedly there are resentments. But to lash out at Jews in the media, that's the oldest kind of prejudice. And
maybe he's ticked off that Elliot Spitzer is getting the time slot. He, of course, is
Jewish. Can I just say one other thing? Because I was with CNN for almost 20 years. And I have to say that in the time I was here, and I know this is just coming from an old white guy, but I found it to be a place that celebrated diversity, that encouraged diversity, that became more diverse over the time that I was here. And so I just have to say, I don't think that Sanchez's complaint squares with the fact, especially when you look at, as Paul has pointed out, how much CNN supported, promoted him, and gave him really high-profile assignments.
Real briefly, Paul Farhi, does he have a future? Can he get hired somewhere else?
I don't think so. Maybe at the local level, but I think he's tainted now. I think he's radioactive.
I disagree. I think you'll see him again.
All right, we have dueling predictions there.
Rick.
We will see. Carol Simpson in Boston, thanks very much for joining us. Paul Farhi, Jamie McIntyre here.